My name is Lachlan. I'm South African and I have quadriplegic cerebral palsy. So if at any point I look or sound strange to you, that's why. Today I want to talk about the fact that everything that is currently happening in the West, whether it's the UK, the rest of Europe, or Canada, in terms of cultural instability because of policies being pushed by leaders which don't benefit the common man and in most cases are actually to their detriment. All of this has happened before, and it has happened in my country of South Africa. You see, in terms of a modern globalized society, or the modern era of such, South Africa was one of the first, if not the first, rainbow nations, as it used to be called. The idea of the Rainbow Nation was that after the fall of apartheid, all South Africans would be absorbed into one unified identity as South Africans, despite our often highly opposed cultural values. And in 2025, that project has well and truly failed. But that hasn't stopped the global order from trying again and again in other places. As I said, the UK is currently undergoing this in terms of massive waves of unwanted immigration from the third world, which native English people and natives across the UK do not want. The same is true in Canada and across the rest of Europe. But the leaders continue to push for these detrimental social policies anyway, because they themselves will never face the consequences of what they push. They have enough money and, ironically, privilege to avoid any real danger from the people they are importing en masse into their countries. There is a kind of disdain that these leaders have, whether it's in South Africa or in the West, for the natives of their own country. This is even happening to a smaller extent, although not smaller by much, in South Africa, where we have massive numbers of illegal immigrants from the rest of Africa coming here and essentially being a burden to our already failing public services. Our hospitals are not equipped to handle even the native South African population because, due to corruption and mismanagement, they simply don't have the money or the resources. Now we have people from Zimbabwe, Malawi, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, and other African states simply coming here and wanting to take whatever benefit they can reach. And this is one of the things which may, in time, lead to an actual civil war in South Africa because local South African activists have been trying to act against this in a legal manner by taking it to court and having foreigners disallowed from benefiting from South African public services. But the ANC government has, for several months at least, if not over a year, been vocally in support of the idea that foreigners should be able to come here and benefit from our healthcare and also our public schools, and that anyone, any South African who is opposed to this or who speaks out against it or who tries to prevent it is simply a traitor to the idea of African unity. That's another thing you'll hear quite often from these leaders. Again, whether it's here in South Africa or in the West. They talk about unity, but what they mean is unity for us peasants, not them, because they live in fancy gated estates guarded by heavily armed security, and as I said before, they will never face the consequences of anything that they make us live through. All of this is just a repeated cycle because for these people, for these leaders, our safety and well being does not matter. They are committed to a shared ideological playbook and they will see it through, come hell or high water. In the case of the South African situation, because we have so many years ahead of the rest of the world, but by which I mean these policies have been enacted for decades at this point. South Africa is now well and truly at the brink of failure, and the ANC, which once was the darling of the international community, has lost a lot of its moral authority, mostly because whether you like him or you don't, when Donald Trump had a South African delegation, which included our president, Cyril Ramaphosa, at the White House, he exposed the ANC for what they are, a bunch of lying, corrupt thieves who have betrayed the promise that they gave to their people. I will be very clear about this. The African National Congress is guilty of treason. In my view, they all deserve to be executed. Not merely because of the anti white agenda which they are pursuing in terms of land expropriation and what they call economic transformation, but because of how they have betrayed the futures of black South Africans. They were supposed to liberate black people from oppression. Turns out that was never their goal. The ANC has no problem with oppression. They just want to be the ones doing it. Because the funny thing, which most outsiders to South Africa don't realize, is that although ANC politicians and their spin offs, such as Julius Malema's Economic Freedom Fighters and Jacob Zuma's Umkhonto weSizwe Party, talk a lot about African unity, specifically meaning black unity. None of these people even like each other, and they like the common black South African even less. If anything, all they see ordinary blacks as is a tool to win elections every few years. That's it. The the quality of life for most black South Africans has not improved since the fall of apartheid, and in many cases has actually gotten demonstrably worse than it was under apartheid. And now, because the ANC, as I said, has kind of lost its moral authority, their rhetoric and their agenda has become more and more nakedly desperate. High-ranking members within the ANC as a party, as well as the ANC as a governing body, are saying more and more extreme things with regard to their program of economic transformation and land redistribution. And it's painfully apparent that they're only doing this because they know their time is running short and that they have lost the mandate of the people, even though they would never admit that or admit that the ANC itself is a criminal cartel. But these are the facts. And just at the social level, South Africa is a country in decay. There are things happening here every day that don't even make the news because so many other bad things dominate the headlines. For example, the rise of instances of women being targeted and sometimes even grabbed by men that they do not know in public places like malls and cinemas is on the rise. And you won't read about this in our national media or even South African corporate media because both of those entities, whether they are different companies or not, have essentially become the propaganda arm of the ANC government. Now, I'm sure that somebody will come up and disagree with me and say, oh no, but the ANC is not the sole ruler anymore. They are part of the GNU, the Government of National Unity. Let me be clear. The GNU, in my opinion, is meaningless because even though we now technically have a multi-party coalition in power, ever since the Government of National Unity was formed, it has changed nothing about the ANC's governmental policy except to make them more radical and more desperate. The ANC still does whatever the ANC wants. The other parties complain, they hold press conferences, they threaten to leave the GNU, and nothing ever comes of it. Because, in my view, all of the political parties and factions in this country are only in existence to serve their own power and their own egos. None of the politicians in this country genuinely care for the well being of our people. Black, white, Indian, colored, and everything in between. They don't care because they are all wealthy in their own rights and they do not have to deal with the realities of everyday working life as the vast majority of South Africans do. And so this is what the West has in store for it if something does not change. Your countries will not collapse overnight, but you will be condemned to a slow, depressing, and painful decay from which you will eventually feel as if there is no escape. I do not say these things merely to be morbid or depressing. I say these things because I believe them to be true. And as someone who is a journalist by trade, and as a South African with no real economic or political opportunities in my future, I am doing this because I believe it to be important. Even if this video is only seen by about 5 or 10 people, I really don't care because at least I will know I made a record of life as it is in South Africa and the world more broadly in 2025. As always, I hope that you got something of value from my content. Look after yourselves, take care of each other, and for now, farewell.